Salut tout le monde, moi c'est Émilie Nox, je suis la chargée de projet du CQPI. Vous avez tous reçu des courriels de moi dans les dernières semaines. Donc c'est vraiment un plaisir de vous voir aujourd'hui, de voir des gens de plein de différents milieux. Donc pour le prochain panel, je vais inviter nos panélistes à se joindre à nous. Juste vous avertir pour ceux qui ont la traduction, la prochaine session, ça va se dérouler en anglais. Et ça va être sur le thème de la prévention de l'itinérance chez les populations autochtones. So I'm really pleased to announce the next session, which the whole theme is on Indigenous homelessness prevention, and it's going to be moderated by Heather Johnston, who's the Executive Director at Projets Autochtones du Québec. And we've got 4 panelists, and I want to say a big thank you to each and every one of them, especially 2 of them who came and filled in at the last minute. We had a couple last minute cancellations, and they were willing to come and lend their time and expertise, so we're incredibly grateful to them. So I will pass it over to Heather. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. So if you work in homelessness, you probably know the expression, in crisis there is opportunity. And this panel had a bit of a crisis this morning because we had 2 panelists who couldn't be with us. Actually, one was Philippe Meilleur, and he wasn't able to be with us today. Philippe's the Executive Director of Native Montreal and the President of the Quebec Association of Native Friendship Centres, and he has broken his wrist. So he's not able to be here, and we send best wishes to Philip. But we did have a bit of a crisis. We had a dearth of panelists a few hours ago, and but that we've turned that into opportunity because we've got 2 new panelists who have joined us, and they're both people who have incredible experience working in the area of Indigenous homelessness. So we've turned our crisis on our panel into an opportunity, and you are the lucky people who are going to hear from them today. So the challenge I'm going to have is that I have 2 very full introductions for 2 of the people, and I have less notes for 2 of the other people who just stepped up a couple of hours ago. But I'm going to start. I want to introduce, I'm going to start, and maybe I'm going to let you just fill in a little bit, Alex. So we have with us, we'll just go down the row here. So we have Alexandre Huat-Joncas, and Alex and I have worked very, very closely together over the last few years throughout the pandemic. So Alex is a community project manager with the Montreal Indigenous Community Network, and the network supports all of the organizations working, Indigenous organizations and Indigenous serving organizations working in Indigenous homelessness in Montreal. And as someone who's managing an Indigenous organization working in the area of homelessness, I can attest to the incredible support that we've had from the network as an organization, but also in bringing us together. So I don't know, do you want to add anything about yourself? That you want to, just about who you are, what you do quickly as an introduction?
Yeah, so maybe very quickly. Yeah, my name is Alex. So I've been working at the network for 4 years. And I guess mostly where I will be speaking from today is that we organize meeting spaces for Indigenous and Indigenous serving organizations. So that's where we get all the feedback from the ground and what are the needs of the Indigenous community in terms of homelessness. My specific file is homelessness. And we also are about to publish a report on Indigenous homelessness. So this is kind of what I will be sharing today from. Thank you.
And I literally texted Alex at 11:30 this morning and said, please, can you come and help us out on the panel? So thank you. Okay. Next to Alex, we have Michael Rice, who's the chair of the First Nations Market Housing Fund. So Michael was born and raised in Kahnawake, and he is Mohawk of the Bear Clan. He's a founder and past manager of the Caisse Populaire Kahnawake, the largest Indigenous credit union in North America. He has worked for over 35 years as an access to capital and institutional development specialist in the areas of housing, commercial, developmental business, venture capital, and infrastructure financing, and is currently self-employed operating under the name of ATC Innovators. His housing work over the years has been with the Credit Union, Indian and Northern Affairs Canada Community Infrastructure Branch, Housing as a Business, and the Ganawagi Housing Department in initiatives to move First Nations communities to private home ownership. Michael holds an MBA from the Ivey Business School, the University of Western Ontario, so it's our second person from London. We had a speaker from London, Ontario this morning on the panel. And he's married with 2 sons and resides in Kanawaki. And I think your son is here today to see you in action. Yeah. Beside Michael is Adrian, and Adrian is someone I know well because Adrian had my job as Executive Director at Projets Autochtones du Québec before I had the job, so we have collaborated over the last few years. Adrian has spent the last 15 years working with Indigenous communities, urban and in community, specifically in the areas of housing, health, and homelessness. She has worked at the not-for-profit level as ED of Projets Autochtones du Québec, which is an organization for Indigenous men and women who are in situation of homelessness or at risk. She's also worked at the public service level, most recently as the City of Montreal's Interim Commissioner of Indigenous Relations. She currently works for the Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal, the SPVM, as a Community Development Advisor. Welcome, Adrian. And beside Adrian is my colleague Nathalie Julien, and Nathalie joined the panel after Alex, so somewhere between 11:45 and 12. Natalie is our Intervention Services Manager at PAC. There's probably nobody in this room who has more experience on the front lines working in Indigenous homelessness. She works out of our 2 shelters. She is on the front lines day and night for 8 years, I think, at PAC. 7 or 8 years is coming up. And did you want to add anything else just to introduce yourself? Or? Yes. Yeah, there's a microphone just right there.
Might as well go all the way if I've been that last minute. So actually it's an honor to be here and be able to share a little bit about our ongoing realities. I did want to mention that I am Cree from Manitoba, for Treaty 4. Also, to start off, when I was at Algonquin College, I did do an intern with Women's of Canada, Women's Native of Canada. So that was an experience, but it was like almost, 15 years later that I came back to the Indigenous community and nonprofit. Other than that, I think I will move on.
Okay, you can leave that there.
Just for the record, this is my first time doing this, so please excuse my mistakes.
You're okay, you can just leave it on the table. So Indigenous homelessness in Montreal sometimes tends to be the more visible face of homelessness, and we hear quite a lot about it. Some of you may have read the Ombudswoman's report, who came out came out last May, so almost a year ago, and the report called the situation of Inuit homelessness in Milton Park a humanitarian crisis. And for those of you who are not from Montreal, Milton Park is probably, 200-300 meters from here? It's not far. And so we hear a lot about Indigenous homelessness, particularly Inuit homelessness. In Montreal and in other major cities, Indigenous peoples do tend to be overrepresented in the homeless population. In Montreal, from the last census, 2018, it's about 15%, and we're waiting to hear the results of hopefully coming out this fall of the census that we did last October. So as you're going to hear this morning, and we're going to be talking about some of these issues, the face of Indigenous homelessness can look different than the non-Indigenous population. And we know that the reasons that Indigenous people may be homeless can also be different from non-Indigenous populations, and then our response also needs to be different. And it struck me this morning during Peter's presentation when he started with the universal prevention, and he didn't focus on that, he focused on others, but the universal prevention, where we're looking at affordable, adequate homes in a place where people want to live, in many ways is where we do need to start with Indigenous homelessness, because we know the situation of housing in Indigenous communities and on reserves is sorely lacking. We know there's a lot of overcrowding and multi-generations living in the same house, and that is in some ways what often pushes Indigenous peoples to come to the city in search of better housing, and better quality of life. So I think I'm going to leave it here. I've got a few questions for the panel, and then I think at the end there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, and we're going to explore some of these issues. So I'm going to start with Adrian, and we want to talk a little bit about the rise that we're seeing in homelessness. So we don't have the numbers yet from the census that we did last year, but we know anecdotally that Indigenous homelessness in Montreal has grown exponentially during the pandemic. And I'm going to ask you, Adrian, what do you think is driving this growth? What are the root causes? Are the demographics changing, and how so?
Thank you, Heather. So we've seen this rise over the past decade, and we can't, as Heather was mentioning, there's a difference between Indigenous and non-Indigenous homelessness, and we can't talk about Indigenous homelessness without speaking about realities in northern communities, because the prevention starts there. So for decades now, Indigenous peoples have had to come to the city to get access to very basic services. So in many northern communities, you can have a nursing station perhaps, but you don't have the full-fledged health services that we have access to in urban centers. And so many people for years and years have had to travel from north to south for punctual services, for more long-term services, for dialysis. And when they come to the city, if that's on the more long-term basis, sometimes they end up trying to, build a life here. They come with their family members, and their family members are trying to settle in the city. Heather also mentioned the housing shortage in the north. That's definitely a reason where people tend to say, well, I might try my chances here in Montreal because I'm living in overcrowded housing in the north. Also, the lack of infrastructure for social services in many northern communities is a factor. So women who are trying to flee a situation of violence, when you're living in overcrowded housing, you can't go to a women's shelter. You can't even go to your neighbor's house in a community of 200 to 300 people, sometimes up to 1,000 people, where everybody knows everybody. And when the violence is not denounced, many of the women who we used to receive at the shelter have said, I had to just leave my community, I had to leave my kids, I couldn't bring them here not knowing what I was going to get into once I arrive in Montreal. So the lack of infrastructure services in the north has a direct impact on the influx of people into the cities. The lack of employment opportunities, not in all communities, I don't want to overgeneralize either, but in many communities there's a lack of economic development or economic development opportunities, which is why Indigenous peoples are constantly fighting for rights to their land and resources and to have access to the revenues that stream from the exploitation of the resources that are on their territories. So there's a whole host of reasons that drive people to come to urban centers, and sometimes people come with the intention of just staying a short time, and sometimes they come with the intention of setting down roots here, and sometimes they're not sure. Sometimes it's just, okay, let me try and see how it goes, and maybe this will be better than what I'm living in my community. And when people arrive in the South, you can almost imagine it as somebody who's a refugee. If you're coming from a place that's completely different from the urban environment that we're used to, what are you going to face? You're not just going to face the barriers of moving from one city to another, you're going to face a culture shock. You're going to face values of interdependence that you've been used to in your community versus independence where you're on your own, figure it out, make sure you do everything by yourself in an apartment. And so people are confronted with that when they come to the city, and the question is, what supports are available? So if we ask that question for immigration, for example, well, you know, we have people who are staying in hotels as soon as they arrive in Montreal. We have services that are there to help people transition to the city. We have collectives that are there to get furniture for people, to find people housing, to connect people with employment services. What is available for Indigenous peoples, and we'll get into that maybe a little bit later, I don't want to get ahead of myself. But all of these drive the numbers of people who come to the city, who find themselves confronted with numerous barriers. Being Indigenous is one of them, but in addition to the lack of employment, opportunities, etc. So once they're faced with that culture shock, the lack of housing has been talked about, I'm sure, earlier on in the conference, then what? Many of the people coming here that, you know, we've received at the shelter in the past have said, okay, I want to work. But if you're coming from a northern community where you might have dropped out of high school, where you might not have had a job, or you might have had one job, you don't have much of a CV, you're bilingual, you speak Inuktitut and English, but you don't speak French, how do you get access to employment in a city like Montreal? So suddenly, you know, it's which is the lesser of the two evils for some people. And we've had people coming back and forth from community to the city and saying, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting this. We've had young women coming in and being confronted with people who are exploiting them sexually and saying, oh my gosh, do I go back to the abuse in my community? Do I stay here? Although in the city I have a little bit more capacity to move around while I'm dealing with this abuse, so that's less bad than when I'm living. So people are confronted between, you know, the rock and the hard place. And so the question, and I guess we'll get to that soon, is then what's in place to support them, and is it enough?
Thanks. That was a really full answer, and I think Adrian's years of experience also of being on the front lines at PAC is coming through in that response. I don't know, Nat or Alex, we're winging it here. We have noticed some changes in demographics, like the changes in the people who are coming, maybe in age or gender or their situations. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Some of the changes we've seen over the last few years in the pandemic?
I can start and maybe fill in the blanks. I think basically from my observation, we obviously, the most evident one is the Inuit coming down from up north. That has increased, I would say, almost 50% from, I would say, what we are at. Well, let's just leave it like it increased 50% from, let's say, 10 years, okay? Out of these 50%, our population is getting older, the ones that had already migrated down to Montreal. And we are now seeing a higher volume of youth coming down. Youth, women, more than, I mean, most of them are, I would say, under 35, the majority, and the ones that are here are, you know, over 35, pretty much, something like that. Sorry, I forgot the other question. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, I think that was already two very full answers, but maybe I'll just add like a note in terms of in the last census from Statistics Canada, the Indigenous community was one, if not the most rapidly growing population in Canada. So this means that there's more and more Indigenous youth. So that could potentially help to explain why we see more and more youth coming down to Montreal, because there's much more people in the communities being born, growing up, but not much more housing. So those two correlation makes it really difficult for people to sustain themselves up north, so they come more and more here. And another thing that I would maybe note is that Indigenous children are the most placed in the child welfare system, and we see that there's direct correlation between children that are being placed and homelessness for various reasons, which I'm sure a lot of you are already aware, but especially with Indigenous communities, this means that they are growing away from their communities, away from their own culture, and this can become like a very big shock when they get out of the system without a community to rely on and facing the discrimination that we know Indigenous people face in urban settings. So I think those are, yeah, two very important points to add.
Yeah, go, Mike's right there, yeah.
I also wanted to add it because it's pretty dominant is people who are coming out of incarceration. Our level of prisons, the female women across Canada is, I think, hit the 50%, if I'm correct, my last check. And we are seeing this volume also on the streets here in Montreal. If they're provincial, they don't have any exit plans, so it's thank you, you're done, you serve your time, and off you go. Most of these young men and women have no preparation, nowhere to go, so they show up at our doors. They're federal, that's a sentence of 4 years or more. You have a exit plan, and we have Indigenous liaisons, so they have a preparation on action plan on what to do once their sentence is completed and integrating back into society. For the amount of people that are coming in is because they have no housing, no ID. I mean, the most key, if we want to solve part of the problem, we have to be honest with ourselves and look at the alcohol, which is one of the major problems causing homelessness. Added to that fact, from an Indigenous perspective here, and it's probably going to educate some of you, but the government did give us the alcohol in the first place when we first. And I do want to mention, before colonization, there was no homelessness. So those are just a couple of points coming from an Indigenous perspective. But back to our reality here, fixing what kind of where we're at today is a bigger problem. Should I share a bit of prevention, or is that coming
so
next?
the next question was really around what are the programs and supports that we need to be developing to prevent homelessness amongst Indigenous peoples. And we're really lucky because we have a program at PAC that was designed and put into place by Adrian, which is a program called Safe Start, which is a homelessness prevention program for Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness for the first time or newly arrived in Montreal. So Adrian designed the program, and Nat has been running it for the last 5 or 6 years. So I think it'd be good to hear from you about, what are the strategies that program or other programs that you may know about in preventing Indigenous homelessness for people arriving in Montreal, and are there gaps? Are there things that are missing that we could be doing better?
Thank you, Heather. Just to point out a bit about the Safe Start program, this is really geared to prevent our people from falling into either prostitutions, getting into sex trades, getting into drugs and alcohol, falling into those system cracks. And it has expanded, and I'm actually going to be going to Kuujjuaq in 2 weeks, which is I'm very excited to. It's a new program that we are partnering with Makivik with. We have Carlo sitting back there, who is also the consultant for the program. And this program is really to bring the people from up north because there's a big lack of communication. So a lot of the participants that we have in our centers are coming from up north, and there's a lot of miscommunication. People go missing, so we want to develop this virtual project to be able to maintain this communication in prevention. It is also for Safe Start to sensitize the communities up there. So and now letting them know if you happen to go, because the reality is the majority, I would say like 80% of them come to Montreal without an action plan of any kind. So they just arrive with the clothes on their back and show up at our door. So there's no preparation. There's nothing. And this is where, Safe Start, they can communicate with our coordinator. Our coordinator will meet them. We're also working with SPVM as well with this and the YMCA in order to prevent homelessness and also put them on a fresh start, a good start. There's one thing deciding to leave because you're in a bad situation, and they all have various, reasons. Some of them, it's because they're experiencing too much abuse at home. There's a lot of violence, and most of the women, once they do arrive, they're, I forgot the word. Anyway, carry on now. All right. So I did also wanted to point out, because we're here on prevention, one thing that I find that is a huge gap, because one of the main key is alcohol, is having homes where people can actually recover and transition on into better, lifestyles. What we see is many of them have the desire go into detox, many of them have desire, but as you know, alcohol eats incredibly. It's terrible anyway, and it just robs them from everything. And enables them. So with having, it's great to have housing, but I mean, they really, someone needs to really heal from addiction. It's a process. It's not something you can go to rehab, come back out, and then 2 days later, you're back into the same cycle. So we are not doing helping or anything. Yes, they take from that, from, moment to moment, but they need to be in safe places. And right now, Montreal does not have any rehabilitation homes where they we're coming out of detention, detention as well, but I mean rehab centers, detox, we send them up north, we send them out to Sept-Îles, they come back, they're all encouraged, they're all, but I mean, the reality is they need support. And going into a shelter or, homes, I mean, PAC has done a great job in expanding and providing, units and a safe space for our people, but we need to have specialized homes for these people. I could just go on and on. I don't...
Adrian, did you want to add anything about Safe Start and some of the supports and programs we need to have in place?
Yeah, sure. Actually, Nat said a mouthful, and I'm so glad she mentioned the elephant in the room, and this is why it's so encouraging to gather with other Indigenous peoples, because this is when it gets talked about, alcohol. And we talk about homelessness as though it's a housing-specific problem. For our community, it is not. That is part of it. Access to stable housing is part of it. But when you go to Milton Park, and this is where quick fix solutions are not helpful. Some of those people are housed. They have apartments. They will spend the night on the streets once in a while. They will access shelters regularly. They will be out on the streets even on a rainy day rather than in their homes. And if we constantly pitch the problem elsewhere and say, oh, well, it's only a housing issue, or it's the government this and the government that, we don't allow for healing. We don't allow for dialogue around healing and what that actually means for a community. And, I equate it often to the bathtub is full and overflowing, and our solutions are to take a Dixie cup and to try to pitch water out of the tub rather than trying to turn off the faucet. And some of the quick fix programs look at the tip of the iceberg. What do you see on the streets? You see the smaller percentage of people who are chronically homeless, who have severe addictions, and who, yes, require access to low barrier shelters. But when the low barrier shelters become the solution, that is not healthy for our community. And we see people who used to be able to self-regulate, who used to be able to look to people who are staying sober and say, okay, I'm going to try tonight to make a bit of an effort and I want to ask for support services. But those people are now the ones who have access to very low barrier services and who now the drinking has gotten worse. And so I think it's okay to question what kind of solutions are we putting in place? Are those solutions conducive to healing for our community members or not? And that's a very touchy question to be bringing up these days, I would say, because we're not focusing on healthy spaces for people to heal. Nat was saying, and I just want to fully agree with everything she said around people leaving detox, leaving treatment. People want to have access to that. And when they have it, what are the supports when they get out? They're non-existent, because most programming is focused on the visible tip of the iceberg, and that just exacerbates the problem. Our community is a community. You don't see a lot of individuals on the street corner. You see people within their family circles on the streets. And so when 1 or 2 or 3 people are accessing treatments and they get apartments or they have access to stable housing and follow-up psychosocial supports, you see other family members starting to gravitate towards that, or starting to say, oh, okay, he's been staying sober, okay, I might try it. Or he has an apartment, but I'm not allowed to drink in his place. Okay, I'm gonna try to stay sober too. But instead of looking towards that, we've then said, okay, how can we make people as comfortable as possible on the street corner at Milton Park? And I have to say that I disagree with those types of approaches. I think it sucks hope away from our community, and it doesn't acknowledge the fact that we're more than just that, and that people do want to heal, and people are fully capable of healing, and people do want access to employment. They want stable living. They want a better life. So I think we need to be careful about that blame and victimization narrative and focus a lot more on healing services for our community.
Thanks, Adrienne. Okay, I want to bring Michael into the conversation here because we haven't heard from you yet. And I want to ask you, Michael, a question a little bit about housing, because that's your area of expertise and your background. We know there's lots of different housing models out there: social housing, housing first, private housing. So in your experience, what types of housing models respond most effectively to the needs of Indigenous peoples living in urban areas? And maybe I'll just add on, what types of supports do we also need to include in those housing models to make sure that people can succeed in housing?
I just want to give a little introduction to, you rattle off all my titles and all my degrees, but down at the ground level, I'm still a foot soldier. That's why people will follow me. And, so I just want to reinforce that. Yes, I'm the chair of the First Nation Market Housing Fund, but it is a major initiative. We just underwent a major reform. We want to change our whole approach. We want to, first of all, take control. I heard somebody talk about AMHA taking control. We're taking control now. We're going to do things with an Indigenous lens. That's so fundamentally important to do that. By profession, yes, I'm a financier, I'm a banker. I also call myself access to capital specialist. This morning we talked about money, and money is just a tool. The money, the government's not going to provide all the money. We're just dreaming if the government is going to provide money to provide us solutions. We have to get it from the private sector, and we've got to find ways to lever it, and that's what I specialize in. And deploy it to our Indigenous institutions, and we have a number of them, and and then we still work with the mainstream. We work with mainstream banks, which we're doing. So, I want to thank Jim Hughes for giving me a chance to talk here today. I want to reach out. I really want to reach out to people. I'm very big into reconciliation too, as well. I didn't go to residential school, but I went to Indian day school. In my day, when I started in the late 50s, we were told we were less than human. Our culture was pagan, and I remember going home at the end of the day and we would cheer for the U.S. Cavalry, not the Indians in the TV shows. That's how bad it was. But that changed in the mid-60s. we throw out the Indian agent, we throw out the RNCP, and we control our lives. So that's the message I want to give to my colleagues here. Do things with an Indigenous lens from this point forward. Don't be shy. Be hard-faced about it. I am. You know, I wrote a chapter for Jim, the book. He wanted to write about preventing homelessness on Indigenous territories. And my son, younger son, he's not here, he gave me a line there. He says, our culture is our code on how to live. And that's what I follow. That's what we need to do. Now I'm here today. Sure, my experience has been primarily on reserve, but I want to do as much as I can to prevent people from not having to go into the cities and come here and not be, not be able to practice a culture, not have the services, so I'm going to do everything in my power, and that's what I'm doing. I lost myself for a second there. In terms of tools, she asked me about some tools to look at. Oh yeah, I've tools. We have too many people are in social housing on reserves. Social housing means the housing is owned by the band councils, not owned by people. They don't take care of it. People don't know how to, a lot of people were in residential school, and Alex just came with an important statistic, and I want to reinforce that statistic. 54% of the children in foster care in Canada are Indigenous, but we only represent less than 8% of the population. Why is that? Is it because we're stupid? No, because we have lost, in a fundamental way, our life skills. And when you don't have life skills, you can't be housing literate, you can't be financially literate, you can't take care of your children, you know how to love. I've seen it in my community. We have a number of people who went to the Spanish residential school run by the Jesuits, and they came back so messed up, and I was always running. All these years I worked in financing. Why were people always hanging their heads down? My older son is here, lived in Alberta for 9 years. I noticed a lot of Indigenous people there were always had their heads hung down. Now I know why. Now I know why. There's multi-generational trauma. We got to deal with that. So, what are we going to do with these people? Well, the older people, we still got to try to treat them, take care of them. But I will focus. The fund I'm in charge of there. We're going to focus on the youth and on life skills. In Gutnawaga, we had a program, and we developed this program 5 years ago, even before we knew about the residential school. We called the Hope Initiative. And what we would do, we would take a single parent, usually a woman with children, and we would, it was a 4-year program. In the first 2 years, they would learn life skills with an Indigenous lens. They may get coaching from the clan mothers on reserve. They'll know how to manage a house, manage their money, take care of their kids, do things, have support there from our own people. And then 2 years into the program, they start putting down a down payment, okay? And after 4 years, they'll have enough down payment to buy their own house. And what's unique about this program too is the child sees their parent try to improve themselves. And that's the way it should be, That's how children learn from their parents. So we developed this program. We work with the Wood Green in Toronto, Homer Brown people, develop our program wrapped around theirs. It exists already, so we didn't develop it ourselves. We copied it somewhere, but we call it Hope. We also have a program, we call it Housing First, a similar Housing First program. We don't have any people who got Gutnawaga who's roaming the streets, or, we had a bunch of older men about 20 years ago who were living in sheds. So our housing program, what we did, we called them, give me shelters, tiny homes. We took them, now they're all living in tiny homes. We took care of them. So in our world, my community is rich, Gutnawaga, we're pretty rich, but I'm trying to apply these tools to other First Nations communities across the country. And what I'm doing, the work I'm doing now, I'm working with a group of people. There's about 25 of us, including trustees and staff. And we're trying to instill people to build their financial literacy, housing literacy, improve their life skills. Of course, getting capital is important. We're going to do that as well. Looking at people to transition them from social housing to private ownership. It's not a sin to own a house. You know, it's not only white people can be rich, we can be rich too, I tell people, you know. The approaches we use too in our programs, we use a hand up and not a handout approach. That's very fundamentally important. But I'm really concerned though, is reaching out to people who were affected by the residential school. We just can't abandon them. There are so many that need help, and I'm not going to give up. And what we've done too is, now some people don't want to hear this, that I don't think the band councils are doing their job as well. They shouldn't be involved really in like some of the housing initiatives. There are people at the ground level who come at the civil society level, the early adopters. I want to work with them because at the political level, and I was talking to a chap earlier today, you know, too many times the chief will tie, I'll build you a house, you get a house for free if you vote for me. And that's not right either. So I'm trying to change that in a big way too. A lot of chiefs don't like me, but I don't care. I want everybody to equally be prosperous. Building capacity, what we're doing. You know, I think it's inherent in our people. We always had the capacities are still there. And what we do is we release it in people. We do not use a top-down approach. We don't use it from the outside ways to, you can learn something from the outside, but don't use a top-down approach. So, anyway, those are some of the key elements. I'm happy to speak here to reach out to you. But we got a lot of work to do. You know, I'm an old man now, but I mean, Mike Stanhope, who spoke this morning, I know his parents, the same age group as me, but there's just too much to do. So I'll be around for a while.
Thanks, Michael. I have a final question for our panelists today, and I'm going to ask them to just answer briefly. We do spend a lot of time I don't know, criticizing some of the government programs that we're forced to work with in terms of homelessness and housing. So I'm going to ask each of you, and we'll just go down the row here. If you were hired by the government, could be the federal government, provincial government, municipal, band council, you're hired as an advisor on Indigenous homelessness. What's the one thing you would advise government to do to prevent Indigenous homelessness in our urban centers? And so I don't know if there's any, I know there's one federal government person here. If there's any others, listen carefully. Mr.
Okay. Well, just one thing. I think one of our recommendations from our Indigenous Homeless Report that we're going to publish very soon, the first one is to first recognize the expertise of Indigenous organizations in Montreal that are serving the community. Indigenous organizations are governed by Indigenous people. They often have a majority of Indigenous employees. And what is needed also is multi-year funding agreements with these Indigenous organizations to keep the funding stable, because what happens is that our organization need to compete for funding all of the time, and we see that there's a movement towards more multi-year agreement, and the governments are listening, but we need just much more stabilization, because when we think about it, supporting Indigenous organizations, if they hire the most Indigenous employees as well, and they're the one offering the services that the community uses, well, we're doing like, what is the expression, one stone, two birds? Like it's Indigenous employment, we're preventing also homelessness in that way, we're bringing people out of homelessness, but also we're offering a salary to Indigenous people to put in their pocket and pay for their rent and go on their healing journey. So this is really key for us at the network, is to look at how can we support more the Indigenous organizations. So that's what I would say. And I would also invite everyone to just learn more about the Indigenous organizations in the city in Montreal, and maybe there's ways you could even collaborate with some of the organizations. Thank you.
My turn again. I'm sure everybody's heard of rapprochement. You know, we had a major rapprochement with the mouvement Intergénérale in the late 80s. Here we are, the Mohawks and the Québécois. We hate each other, but we found a way to work together now. We got one of the highest performing case populators, the whole network. People don't know that. We do. It's running so well, and we get along together so well. So, anything to the government, approach us, and we don't want to give up our identity. You know, we don't want to give our identity who we are. Treat us as equals. We'll work with you. I've worked with people before, and I seek out people who work with us, but I notice some people don't want to work with us. They just want to take advantage of us. I toss them aside. I can find out very quickly. But work with us. Be sincere. We'll be sincere too. It's a two-way street. We're all here together. So this cooperative approach is one way to go, to have the government think like that. So anyway.
I work with the police, so I'll try not to be too critical of my government colleagues. No, I would say that it's important to create more, English word m'échappe, des discussions stratégiques. Working for the police, we have a lot of, small committees in different sectors to put out fires that are going around with regards to social cohabitation. I would say what's missing is the collaboration where everybody has a part to play. It's not to, shift blame or to say it's only the province, it's only the city, it's only the federal. Everybody has a role to play. And the dialogue needs to happen at a more strategic level. So rather than looking at local problems and trying to deal with the immediate visibility of the issue, giving space to long-term strategy discussions. Oftentimes, now the dialogue that we hear around the police is, okay, we know ticketing is not a solution, we know arresting is not a solution, but when we're faced with somebody who's on the streets, an organization's calling us, the person is barred from every service, we don't want to arrest the person, but then what? Then where do we bring them? And those longer term solutions of transitional housing for people who are transitioning to the city, transitional housing in locations that will not further victimize people in the downtown core, those types of solutions come when there's time and space for discussion and when there's not reactivity based on a big media story that's come out, where suddenly quick funding is available, we need a quick solution, and that quick solution is not always effective. So I would say giving more time and space to strategize with regards to preventing Indigenous homelessness.
Thank you, Heather. It's a good question. I probably would need a few hours with Trudeau, but we'll keep it simple. I think one key factor that would enhance and support and help for homelessness would be within and facilitate our access for our people into these services. I think if we would be able to have, obviously money is the tool, you said? It is a tool. We lack tools. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is I think one thing that I did learn throughout the years working with the Indigenous population, my people, is they want to be served by my people. So in order to facilitate that is, most of their comments, they want Indigenous people, they want First Nation, they want Inuit representation in the centers, in the services to facilitate. So, and we also have participants, which some may / refer to clients, are interested in obtaining jobs. But part of the problem is when you're coming from up north, you have a choice: either you stay with the family, survive, and go hunting, or you, if the family decides that you can, he can go continue his education. Yet, he has to come down to Montreal, Quebec, Amos, different, he has to, move away from home. So just imagine, you're a teenager. Okay, you're going to high school now? Okay, we're gonna send you up north. Ouch, eh? Yeah. anyways, I just like to throw little things for you guys to think about, because I think there needs to be a lot more sensitization about our reality, you know. And partially, you know, the land back would help, but I think it's about also facilitating, opening up programs where these people can, you know, do hands-on training. Most of the Indigenous people, as intelligent as we are, we do learn a lot by, you know, hands-down trades, you know, mother to daughter, father to son. The trade is handed down. We learn by, you know, a lot of this. And I think because of the reality of lack of education within the homeless population, within some of the centers, would be able to be given them programs where they can learn on the job and not have to have a BA or something too. Because some of them are not in a position to get academic. Some of them are way beyond. They're in their, you know, mid-40s, going to adult school in a non-Indigenous environment is not as welcoming or enticing as, but if I offer this young man an opportunity, you know, you want to do welding, well, here's something, you know. So we also need money for these type of programs, and also we want more people. I mean, the government, you know, has a lot of people working, but very low percentage, you know. I mean, I remember back in a day where I used to apply, and I had applied, and I had to check a little box that said minority in order to flag me down, you know, which, anyway, insulting, but anyway. So I think, I'm almost done. Time, right? I think what I'd like to see is an opportunity for Indigenous people to be able to train in these Canadian services so they can meet the need and be welcoming their own people, and also give that opportunity to the participants who, I mean, some of them, they just down out, you know, just had a bad opportunity, bad things happen sometimes, you know, and they're pushed sometimes in those positions. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Nat. So that's the end of our panel discussion. I think we have a few minutes left for questions. And maybe we'll just conclude with a remark that Natalie made at the beginning, to just remind ourselves that there was no homelessness in Montreal before this land was colonized. We are here on unceded Mohawk territory that was never given up by the Mohawk peoples. And I hope you'll all see the irony with me that we are here talking about Indigenous homelessness on their land. And I think I'll end it there, and I'm going to turn it over to any questions.
Sorry. Thank you for a wonderful panel. Some of you have touched on harm reduction, but I wonder if I can ask about it directly. What do panel members think of various harm reduction initiatives, such as supervised consumption services, managed alcohol programs, harm reduction housing? What are your views?
So,
Sorry, I'm more focused on preventative stuff before it gets there. That's what I do. So I'm not really versed on treating something that's already happened. I'm not strong there. Like I said earlier, we'll build the people who have been affected by residential school, who have lost their life skills. We'll work with them as much as possible. But I'm a preventative guy. Catch it before it happens.
I think, so Natalie and I both work for PAC, and I think the philosophy of PAC has been to try and offer a range of services and models that meet different needs. So we run harm reduction, we have a managed alcohol program, residential managed alcohol program, we have a wet shelter. We also run a dry shelter and dry transitional housing to make sure that we're trying to offer spaces that meet the needs of the community as a whole. And to have a varied approach, and also partnerships with a wide range of partners that are offering also some harm reduction services, some abstinence services, and that has been our philosophy at PAC. And I don't know if you know the broader community. You can just maybe speak.
Yeah, I think all over Montreal there's a lot of different approaches to both harm reduction and how to deal with addiction. Like right now we're working at the network on the development of an Indigenous treatment center in Montreal with the Native Friendship Center. So hopefully this is going to come through, and what we want to do also is to look at both the research that exists on best approaches in harm reduction with the Indigenous community, but also go back to community members themselves and ask, like, you know, what models has worked for you, what types of like treatment center did you like, what types of experience you didn't like, and also consult with the frontline workers to see, you know, who is doing what, in what capacity, what is going well, what is not going well. But I think that overall to have a continuum of services, of different services, and also different approaches will work best with different community members. For example, we know that the MAP House program, which is the managed alcohol program that PAC opened, has been able to provide housing for community members that have been chronically homeless for decades. So we know this is a model that can provide amazing results, because a lot of those community members were offered housing, as Adrienne mentioned earlier, but went back to the streets for X and Y reason, mostly because they want to be with their own community. So to provide a space where people are together with other community members and they don't have to go outside, ask for money to keep their consumption alive because they're being provided alcohol in a lower and lower dosage, right? That the goal is to eventually go to abstinence. But with this harm reduction model of taking people where they're at, I think it's very important in some contexts. And then it's important to have abstinent options as well for people who are ready to take that step.
I won't venture forth an opinion. I'll just maybe speak to what our community members have mentioned when we've asked them the question. So when PAC was developing its transitional housing program quite a number of years ago, we had asked the community members themselves, should this be a dry space? Should this be a place where we, tolerate some consumption? What should it be? What kind of house rules should be in place? And what all of the people struggling with addictions responded to us was that please make it a healthy space where we're not supposed to be drinking, because that is what we need to get better. So that was the response at the time for that. At another moment, we were consulting community members around, Milton Park cohabitation. What do we do? Do we create an indoor space where it's safe to consume? Should it be a tent? What should it be? And in a conversation with one young lady, her response was, "What are you, nuts?" She said, "Are you kidding? All of the stuff that you see on the streets where, once people are super intoxicated and people are getting aggressive, you want to deal with that inside? And you want to create a microcosm of that?" That was her response. So I just wanted to share that. That doesn't cover everybody's responses, everybody's needs, but I felt it important to bring those voices back.
So I want to say thank you for sharing your experiences and expertise. Thank you for being here today. And I heard about the topic of generational trauma and healing. So I was thinking about what will it take to encourage the youth in your communities to go back the way that we used to live like on the land, to go back in the indigenous way of life. What will it take to convince them, the youth, the community?
Well, actually, we have a very, very powerful movement in my community where we always, even before this residential school business started, we have embraced our culture in a major way. I mean, we revitalized the language. We're trying to, by doing this, instill other First Nations to do the same thing as well. Just show by example. And like I said earlier, I don't repeat myself, but promoting doing things with an Indigenous lens and take control and just don't ask for things, do it. And, I don't explain it. My community, we're a very vibrant community, and I don't know if you should go there sometime. You'll see what it's like. It's like,
Yeah, I would love to visit, yeah.
I'm not saying everything's on edge all the time, but people, we are very activists, and I know it's the nature of our race. But we want to help our brothers and sisters across the country, and we're doing that in a major way. So it's just show by example, and I tell people, yeah, you can do it. Be confident, and don't look. Go back to the old ways, okay?
Yes.
We tell people go back to the old ways. Each time the meeting was opened by Mike this morning, that's Honda Gradegua, That's how we give thanks to the Creator,
Yes.
And we don't. Ever since this thing happened, with the churches, well, me personally, I've left that behind now. I never was really into that, but now I've left it behind because I saw what they did to our people. It's horrible. It's horrific. We have our ways. We praise the Creator in our own way, and that's, respect that, and we'll respect what you do. If you want to go to church, fine. I'm not going to criticize you, but don't impose your ways on us. That's what I tell people. Let us, go back to our old ways, and we are, and my community is. So anyway, that's my words.
So many of the people who you might see on the streets are talented artists, are people with tremendous skills that maybe don't get recognized when you're in an urban environment. Some of them are carvers, painters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think providing for the youth education support and economic development opportunities. We don't speak enough about, I think, in homelessness circles or homelessness conferences. And Michael was saying earlier, there's nothing horribly wrong with home ownership on reserve in communities. There's nothing horribly wrong with talking about breaking the cycle of dependency either and giving people capacity. So there are many youth who are developing entrepreneurial skills, they're artists, they're trying to find ways to sell their work, so encouraging that. And yeah, providing, I think, economic opportunities for people, pre-employability programs as well for people. It's important to talk about hope for the youth. Yeah.
Quickly, I think the youth are extremely important and key because they're tomorrow's leaders. And from an Indigenous perspective, we need to sow into them. We need to give them opportunities. We know the death and suicide rate in communities up north. In prevention down here, it doesn't limit. We have youth committing suicide here in Montreal. No hope, no. So they need to come back to their roots. They need to, we need to open spaces. There's not really, I see a few non-Indigenous shelters, but and places where we need this for our youth. We need to take control. One thing in the Indigenous Michael has mentioned, is we take care of them. So we need to have the ability to do that. But we don't have enough leaders, Indigenous leaders in Montreal to be able to facilitate and start. So, I mean, it's going to start. Today's a good step forward. But I think the youth are precious and key.